Greetings. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about conflict at the national level. There has been a lot of presentations in the media recently about events in the Middle East, and I think it's important to recognize that, at least in my humble opinion, most of the newscasters, so-called journalists, so-called experts that I've heard on television um, give us a very extremely weak explanation. And adding politics to this whole array of scenarios, I think even makes it more complex. Now, unlike many of those people on television, I do not have an answer for you. Well, I do. I don't know. Maybe a better one. It's extremely complex and there's multiple variables. And it's like that in the criminal justice system, which is the area where I teach, of course. And I think one of the problems is that we look for simple answers. For example, I've heard many news people say that the Middle East has basically exploded into protests and riots because of a YouTube video. I find that extremely hard to believe that a YouTube video, as bad and mean as it is, as inappropriate as it might be, would cause multiple countries to go into great states of protest and violence. That just does not make sense. That may be a scenario which was basically what was seen as, okay, that's the starting point of a whole bunch of other things that had been building for a long period of time. So I would suggest that we take a closer look at what's been going on and we consider the political vacuum, the power struggles that exists in these conflicts. So I have some questions here. My first question, who are the leaders in these particular conflicts? Or who is the leader? Or are there particular parties or groups or organizations? Or is this leaderless? How is it organized? How has it evolved? When did it start? How has it changed? And I think these situations need to be studied from a cyclical point of view, that we have these cycles of protests, something we saw a year, 2 years ago. We've seen in different areas. Is there a contagion factor? Does it go from one to another and another? Does it pick up and gain, a life of its own in that sense? Like a ball rolling down a hill that just keep picking up speed. And the other thing I would point out, at least I think the sociologists have probably the best explanations, but it seems often that sociology does not get into the press. And that's very unfortunate. And I would say, I think if you used the works, historical and contemporary works, and combine them of Emil Durkheim and Karl Marx and Max Weber, and brought into play some of the more contemporary theorists in sociology, certainly Mead and Bloomer, and you began to look at micro, meso, and macro levels. Look at the analysis from huge structures down to the individual level and everything in between. You can see it gets very complex. But what I would argue is that two overriding concepts seem to be operating here, both developed by sociologists or philosophers or whatever you want to call them. Basically in sociology, these are Metallica is to heavy metal music, as Emil Durkheim and Karl Marx are to sociology, okay, if I can put it that way. And hopefully Metallica is a very popular band in the heavy metal music industry, just to try to give an analogy. what I would say here is the two major concepts really to look at are Durkheim's anomie, or the situation of normlessness where we don't know what the rules are, we're unsure, and Karl Marx's theory of alienation, where we feel lost and we are separated from our work and our families and our sense of belonging. And underlying all this, I think, is what we see in these cycles. And in essence, I believe that at the core, if we are to start our analysis, we need to examine carefully what comes out of Durkheim's anomie: too much social control or not enough social control. And in Durkheim's case, he believes that problems occurred when we don't have enough social control, which becomes anomie. In contrast, Marx believed too much social control led to alienation or problems, misery, and conflicts. So you might say, well, are those two parts of the same coin, or are they opposed and on a continuum? And I would say that those are two major variables to look at. But I would say that they're not static, but they're dynamic, they're ever changing. And so in order to start our analysis, I think it would be good to ask, is there too much social control in that society or not enough? And how has that changed? And rapid change may lead to all kinds of problems in particular societies that are experiencing a great deal of anomie or alienation. And so I think what we see is these societies try to move toward a balance but can overcorrect. That you can actually go from a situation of having too much social control from not enough, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And so I would bring these two concepts. And this has nothing to do with communism. Since I mentioned Karl Marx, I'm just using a theory that, a concept, organizing concept that he developed, alienation. So we don't even have, I'm just attributing credit where it's due. But I think that's the first step to look at. And what I did is I stepped back and I said, aha, if I was to take a close look, it's time to put CNN, NBC, or whatever they call themselves now, and Fox News on the psychoanalytic couch, but use these sociological organizing themes. Depending on which you get, it seems like Fox has more of an anomie approach and CNN has more of an alienation approach. Well, who's right? I don't know. But I think it's very important to conduct a careful analysis and look at all these factors and how they've changed and how they influence economic conditions, political structure, conflict over power, organizational levels, different groups that are structured and how they are striving to gain credibility and power. Rumors, social change, technology, the educational institution, the family, and so on and so forth, trying to put this all together. And I think what you'll find is that a YouTube video is almost meaningless. It could have been any event. It could have been a song. It could have been a statement a politician made. And so the simplicity of saying this caused that is an easy way out. If you ask me, I'm shocked that the press is so irresponsible. It is only yesterday in the New York Times, which would be September 16th, 2012, that on the back page, if you were to read an article written by a very astute observer, he goes into great detail about what he believes some of the causes are or contributing factors to the conflicts in the Middle East. And that is in the review section. Unfortunately, I have already recycled my New York Times, but you can find that online. So I leave you with those thoughts to be extremely critical of all those news stations and those journalists, and be cautious of those so-called experts, and critically evaluate that information for yourself. Thank you, and have a good day or night.